Hi everybody out there in Lionel land. We're back again with the team here working on one of our display layouts. Give you a little bit of a behind the scenes look at what we're doing and a couple quick how-tos on how we make our scenery. Now a lot of people get daunted by the idea of turning a bare piece of plywood into a finished scenic layout, but there are a number of different ways to do it, and really it's not that hard. What I always tell everybody is just give it a try. Most of the materials are very inexpensive, so if you don't like it, you just rip it off and try again. We're going to start with what we do on the underside of the scenery, the part that you'll never see when it's finished, but very important, just like when you're building your benchwork, to give it a good skeleton, a good structure to support itself, and that is building up the framework of the scenery itself. What we've done here, you'll see a number of different methods used all in the same shot, and you can really build this up from any materials you have, whatever's going to give you the type of shape and size and style of scenery that you desire. A lot of people use different types of thicknesses of insulation foam, like you see here on these green sheets of 1-inch thick foam. You can also build a web out of cardboard boxes, cardboard strips. We just take old cardboard boxes. Everyone has those coming in with all your new trains that you're buying. Save the box, cut it into strips, bend it to shape, hold it together with hot glue, and build your basic landform out of that. We've been using some scraps of masonite left over from the fascia here to make some areas for roads and retaining walls. And then to give it a final coat and something for the plaster to have some teeth on, we've been putting some basic aluminum screening here like you'd put on an outdoor porch or patio area, and meshing the entire mountain area in that. So you can get a sense here as we work up in scale the size and scope of what we're doing. As long as your scenery is strong enough to support the weight of the plaster on it, you should be fine. We build ours a little bit more robust here just because of the nature of the projects we're building. These are going to have to travel to and from their final installation. They'll be on the road several times over the course of their lives, and of course also be around lots of people and hands-on in ways that we'll probably never be able to imagine or would care to think of over the next 5 to 10 years. So it's important to have a good strong base, make sure that everything will be there to last. If you're just doing this at home and you're putting it in the back corner of the layout, hey, as long as it's strong enough to support itself, you'll be in good shape. So once you have your foundation down, next we move on to spreading some plaster. Once we have our scenic base constructed, the next step is to apply a coat of plaster. You can see our dynamic duo of Sadie and Sandy here, hard at work on that right now. See, it is true that all we do here all day at Lionel is play with trains. This is a simple mixture of regular drywall compound, which you can pick up at any home supply store. We usually do 2 coats. The first coat goes on as just a basic coverage to cover over the screen and all the supporting structure and give you a bit of a base to work off of. Some people will also soak like a paper towel in the plaster and lay that directly over as well as another way to do this. Once that hardens, then you can go back and put on a heavier second coat, which will then start carving and shaping. Now, a couple of little tidbits of advice on this. One is to make sure that you protect everything you don't want to be covered in plaster, whether it's on yourself or elsewhere on the layout. We've put some plastic sheeting underneath in all of the tunnels to make sure that as things drip through, that doesn't get on the track inside. That'll be a real bear to clean up later on. And also protect your room and anything else that you're working in. Just like if you were drywalling your house at home, you want to clean things up. We do recommend that you get the dry mix compound, drywall compound, instead of the pre-mixed wet stuff that comes in a tub. That'll work great for making roads and some other things, but what I've always found, and what we've found here in the past too, is that when you apply that and it dries, it tends to shrink a little bit and crack on you. So by getting the dry mix, you'll save some money, and also you can vary the consistency and get the amount of moisture in there that you want, and it'll dry in a much better state for you to carve and work over later. People always ask, how thick should the plaster be? It can actually vary a little bit. If you're doing the first rough coats and whatnot, or you're going for a more smooth surface, then you want it a little bit on the creamier side, maybe like a heavy cream or a pudding. If you're going with something like your final coat that you know you want to stick in place and plaster, or you don't want to wait for it as long to dry, you can go with something a little thicker, a little bit more of a mud, heavy clay type of mix. There's really no right or wrong way to do it. If it feels too dry, add a little more water. If it feels too wet, add a little more plaster. Not rocket science. Even Lionel people can figure it out. Once your plaster has dried, you'll have a nice wedding cake looking mountain here. So go to the store, get yourself a nice slice of cake and enjoy that because you've gotten this far in your scenery. And then after that, it's time to get a little bit picky about your scenery and begin carving away anything that looks like icing and start making it more like rock. This is a bit of a slow process, and another one of those things that people get nervous about, that they're not going to be able to make it work right. You don't have to be a Michelangelo to carve rocks. Mother Nature isn't perfect, and the more varied and odd you can get it, the better it's going to look. Some of the best looking rocks we've carved on here so far have been the ones where we went, oops, didn't mean to take the knife that way. You can use a variety of tools for this. There are different picks and things available. If you go to the art store, looking in the clay section and sculpting section, you'll find a lot of great useful tools. You can also find some wonderful things around the house or the hardware store, different types of brushes, anything with a nice metal tip on it that will give you a scratch or a scrape. Wire brushes are another great tool to give some texture and final contours to things. It'll be hard to judge exactly when it's still white plaster like this how everything looks, but you give it your best shot, and then once you wash it with paint, which you'll see here in just a second, you'll see a lot of the details really start to pop out. If it doesn't quite look right, no big deal. You can always scrape away a little bit more or mix up another batch of plaster and slap it over the top and build right over and keep on going. Everything here is redoable. Okay, once you've got your scenery carved, the next step is to add some color and finally go from a barren white landscape to some nice rocks and hillsides. The easiest way to apply color to these is in thin washes and build up the paint gradually and the colors gradually so that you don't go too far. It's always easier to add color to this than to take it back off again. So we use acrylic paints. You can use the cheap stuff you can get at the local store. It doesn't have to be high quality paint. And then some mixing cups, whatever you have around that you don't plan on reusing for beverages, it will be just fine. Mix a little bit of paint in there and thin it down a lot with water so that you have a nice, very watery mix. The thinner the better. That way, as you paint on over the rocks and things, you'll get a color that blends in. If it looks too light, you can add a little more pigment or just add another coat and keep going. We start with a base color. In this case, we started with a light gray. Then you can mix in some of your highlight colors, some browns, some umbers, siennas, to give it a little bit more pop. Once the colors are on, you want to bring out all those little cracks and crevices that you've created with your tools with a thin wash or two of black paint, and that'll flow in there and really give all the dark areas some shadow. And then finally, last but not least, you take a little bit of white paint, not thinned down, and you do what we call a dry brushing technique. You put just a little bit of paint on the end of the brush, wipe almost all of it off, and then just very lightly brush over the surface of the rocks, and you'll get these nice little white highlights that really make all the raised details stand out. And when you're finished, you have a very nice three-dimensional looking carved rock surface that's ready to now apply your ground cover and finish your scenery.